Well, thank you everybody for being here. This is something I never thought we would do. Never in 59 years did I ever think that we'd have a digital symposium. For 58 years, we've gathered at universities across the country, and today we're not shoulder to shoulder like we normally are, but we're webcam to webcam. But I am very happy to see you all. In recent years, we've had as many as 120 registered for a symposium, but today we've got 153 registered for this week. And we've decided to do this so that we can continue our education, continue improving, and continue a tradition that was born in 1961. So welcome to the 2020 UPAA Digital Symposium. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jay Drowns from Utah Valley University.
Thanks, Glenn. I really appreciate that. And appreciate all the support that the board's given the BYU crew and the UVU crew as we've put together the symposium. It's been quite a ride as we moved from in-face to digital. So there they are. There's our great corporate partners. They've done a lot to help us out in many ways that we can't even begin to talk about here. Today, obviously, is sponsored by Nikon, as Dixie's a Nikon ambassador. Let's look at the week. Here's our schedule for each day, 2 meetings each day. And we have some great speakers along with their sponsors, the corporate partners that have sponsored them. So after daily at 3 p.m. that we're going to have hospitality groups, and these are different digital rooms that'll be hosted by members of the board and other members, so we can get there and get together and have some time talking to each other. And those are going to be you can find the links to those on the Facebook page. While we're doing the presentation, John Scott from Roberts has agreed to help us out. So if you have, oh, I see there's a question there, Mountain Daylight Time. Yes, it is 3 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. John Scott from Roberts will be on each of the presentations, and he'll be here to help us. If you have digital or technical questions about equipment, he's going to be on the chat. So feel free to throw those up on the chat, and then he'll respond to those. And that way that our presenters like Dixie can focus on what makes them great, and he can help us with the digital question, with the technical questions. All right, so let's get right to the heart of the matter. Dixie Dixon is an amazing international commercial fashion photographer. She's also a Nikon ambassador. It's her ability to create amazing images using natural light and bringing authenticity to the images that is why we invited her first, why we felt she'd be important for our group. I just want to turn the time over to her and welcome her to the 2020 UPAA Digital Symposium.
Cool, that sounds good. Thank you guys for having me. I feel super honored to be here. I checked out all the work that you guys do on the website and I was blown away. You guys do some incredible work. So it's really cool to get to be here today. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay, so, okay. You guys see everything? Does it look?
We're good.
Awesome, great, good deal. All right, so before I get started, I'm going to be giving away 4 of my books about fashion photography and lifestyle photography at the end of this. And the way that I usually do that is if you want to go and follow me on Instagram, you can unfollow me later if you don't really want to follow me. But I'll pick 4 random people at the very end of this to get one of my books, one of my signed books. So that's kind of fun. So I'll go ahead and get started. And so photography for me has been a lifelong dream. And I think it's important to kind of show where I've come from and then how I've gotten here really quickly, just so you guys can kind of get an idea of the journey a little bit. So when I was 12 years old, I was given my first camera, the Nikon FG. And I don't think that my parents or anything like that realized like they had created a little monster in giving me this camera, because I was attached at the hip. I fell in love with photography at a very young age. At 16, I ended up doing Little League photography. So I would be up every single weekend shooting all the sports teams for like $10 an hour. And I totally loved it. I loved that experience. I loved getting to work with a crew, and it's just been a really fun experience. At 17, I ended up joining the yearbook staff, and my image ended up making the cover of the yearbook. I bet a lot of you guys probably started in like yearbook and newspaper and whatnot. So that's when I really kind of got out of my shell. I don't know about you, but I am very much an introvert. And so I was very shy growing up. So I felt like the camera really got me out of my shell and sort of got me to where I would interact with people and go to parties and things like that to photograph them. So it's been a really good experience of getting out of my shell, if you will, to pursue photography. At 18, I went off to college and I majored in business. I figured that I really needed to know the business side of things in order to actually make a living at it. And I've been doing it, gosh, full-time ever since. I studied abroad with a world-renowned fashion photographer in London and Prague. And that's when I really fell in love with fashion and commercial and lifestyle photography and working with the crew. So my first actual big break was shooting for a TV show on HDNet. And it's now Access Television, but it's so funny because right out of college, I ended up meeting a video editor who edited for this docu-reality travel show. And I knew that she knew that they were looking for a photographer. And so she ended up referring me for that job. So I actually ended up shooting swimsuit models for over 4 years, and it ran like 20 seasons shooting for this TV show. So we traveled all over from like Ibiza, Spain to Miami and Puerto Rico. But this is actually where, believe it or not, that I learned how to direct people and get into that sort of thing and making people feel very comfortable in front of my lens. And that's sort of what I specialize in, is getting that mood out of people where people tend to look really natural. They don't look like they're posed as much. And so that's kind of drawn me to shoot for other things since then, for like Nikon and a lot of lifestyle campaigns for different folks. And I mean, my favorite client is obviously Nikon. I don't know how many of you guys shoot Nikon, but they're definitely such a great, great company to work with. So I know that a lot of what you guys do is a lot of more documentary and stuff like that, but I'm hoping that today we can go over a lot of lighting, and then a lot of how to get emotion out of people and how to capture that mood in your images on the fly. So for instance, for this image, we used a fog machine to capture the streams of light coming through. So this is all natural lighting. And it was this crazy library in the middle of this old building. We actually had to sign waivers to get into this location in case we fell through the floor or something crazy. So we ended up using that fog machine. How many of you guys have actually used a fog machine? Any of you? They work really well to capture those streams of light. So I really loved and enjoyed working on this shoot. This was for the Z7 campaign. I wanted to show this video before we get all into it. And I'm hoping it plays. So you guys let me know if it doesn't play well, and I'll just skip the videos throughout my presentation. Okay. Did that play okay on you guys' end, or should I skip the rest of the videos?
The video was fine. The audio was still choppy like we talked about before.
Okay, gotcha. We'll play it by ear the rest of the time. So I wanted to get into gear a little bit. I'm sure that you all, I mean, when I was starting out, I was mainly using a lot of zooms, but now that I shoot fashion and commercial and we're able to control a lot of the situations, I only shoot primes. I actually don't even own any zooms. I used to have this zoom at the bottom here, but I actually only shoot like the 85, the 105, the 180 sometimes for headshots, the 58. Those are some of my absolute favorite lenses because they just provide such a sharpness and such a beautiful bokeh in the background that I've gotten so used to shooting the primes, and I really love them. So this is kind of like my gear kit that I go to every shoot. It hasn't been updated yet with the Z6 and the Z7. So when we're on set, a lot of times the client wants both video and stills. So a lot of times I'll either have the Z6 or the Z7 on a gimbal, and we'll be shooting video with that. And then I'll be either shooting with the Z7 or D850 for the stills, depending on what we're doing. So those are my primary cameras of choice currently. I'm blown away by how much sharpness and depth there is to the images that comes out of them. So I've really enjoyed working with it. And the Z7 and the mirrorless really allows you to like travel lighter, because for instance, this image, we climbed down a huge cliff to get down to this location, and just having that smaller body is really, really helpful. So the basic camera settings that I utilize in most of my images are like a very wide aperture. So I tend to do a lot more portrait style, even in fashion, because I like to bring out the personality. So I'm usually shooting pretty wide open. So if it's a 1.4 lens, I might even shoot it up to f3.5 is usually a good happy medium there. So you blur the background nicely, and it draws a lot of emphasis to your subject's face. And then usually I'm using a pretty fast shutter speed. I actually tend to like to shoot at 1/500th of a second, just because I move a lot when I shoot. And then as I shoot, I usually like to compose the image first, and then I will move the focus point to the eyes of my subject. And that's how I get the sharpest images, which now you can use the eye autofocus within the Z7, which works really incredible. So that's kind of how I tend to shoot naturally. I always try to choose my aperture based on how much depth of field I'm looking for. So for this particular shot, I wanted to be sure that the giraffe and the model were in focus. So I shot this around f5.6 to still kind of get a little blur on the background, but you want that giraffe and the model tack sharp for this sort of thing. So,
Hey, Dixie,
yeah, absolutely.
we have a quick question from Courtney. She's asking, what gimbal are you using?
Yeah, so it's the, sometimes we'll use a Ronin. We usually rent them. Usually the Ronin or the Crane. I think it's the Zion Crane 2 is the name of it. It's spelled weird, but the Zion Crane is really helpful. It's really easy to use, and it works so great with the Z6 and Z7 because they're super light. So we really, really enjoy working with those. It makes everything so smooth, like a high production. So
Just a quick reminder to everyone that if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat, and I'll introduce those to Dixie as we move through, because she's hoping to have a real interactive presentation here.
yeah, absolutely. So lens selection. This is a big thing. If you guys are shooting portraits and environmental portraits and whatnot, I found that lens selection plays like a huge role. So for instance, if I'm shooting a headshot, I'll never shoot that with like a 35. That's just too wide. You notice how the model's face is distorted. Like her forehead looks bigger than it is, but the 85 all of a sudden becomes a lot more flattering. So when I'm shooting a headshot, the widest lens that I'll use actually is probably an 85. I used to shoot headshots with the 50, but I would just find that the 85 and higher, even like the 180 or the 105, are just a lot more flattering on people's faces. So for instance, if you have a 70 to 200 lens, try zooming it all the way into 200 and backing up, and then take your headshot, and it's going to have a lot more iconic look to it. It's going to draw a lot more emphasis to your subject's face. So that's kind of how I tend to shoot headshots. You see how the background blurs really nicely, almost just falls out of focus here. So you can see the difference in all of these. Obviously the one on the left was shot with an 85, the center one was shot with a 180, and then the one on the right was shot with a 50. So you can see just the difference in lens choice and how much you blur that background, which sometimes you want to showcase the background more if it's a cool background, which the 50 works great for like full length type of stuff. This is shot with a 180. This is how I tend to light people a lot of times. It's backlit with a reflector in the front, and it tends to look really natural, really lifestyle type of vibe. Believe it or not, I actually do some university campaign work. This is for I went to TCU, and they had hired me to direct their commercial, I guess their TV commercial that they played. And so we ended up capturing all these scenes of the students and, just capturing them in their element. And it was funny because I always try to control the wardrobe a little bit. So for instance, TCU's colors are purple and white. So I was sure to have all of the students, none of them were models, they're all students, wear different shades of purple and things like that to really kind of capture that moment. This was in the science lab. This was a really fun place to light. Hopefully when you guys go to shoot, it's interesting because sometimes I have a lot of time to set up. Sometimes I have 10 minutes to set up. With this particular shot, it was the first shot of the day, so we had a lot of time to sit there and light. So we actually, like on the left is what it looked like before, and then on the right is how we lit it and composed it to make it look way more interesting. So we actually put flashlights underneath all of these beakers and filled up the things with colored water, and then put a pink gel or a purple gel in the background. So it's really fun to get creative with lighting in this way, and the LEDs really work really well. Just small LED lights and flashlights to kind of get the lighting to look cool. So you can really make a huge difference in lighting with people. So that's kind of how we created that. And then using the gels, obviously on this was really important. So this was the TV commercial that we did. It was all constant lighting.
Before doers, dreamers, and trailblazers make their mark on the world, there was TCU. TCU, where dreams take their course.
So that was really fun. I enjoyed working with the students. So with lifestyle.
Quick question, Dixie. Sorry to jump in. First one's going back to aperture. Do you ever use several shots at an aperture of 3.5 or so and compose later to maintain that nice bokeh in the background?
So wait, you're saying say that again? Sorry.
Shoot, and this is from Christina. If Christina wants to jump in on the chat, talk to us. Do you ever do several shots at an aperture of 3.5 or so and compose later to maintain that nice bokeh in the background? My question for Christina is, are you meaning digitally composite images so you maintain the same background? She said yes. Okay, so I meant to compose the various shots together in Photoshop.
Yeah, I don't do a ton of compositing. I tend to like to shoot how it's going to end up. But sometimes if the background is just really awful, sometimes we'll shoot some background plates and then shoot the subject and compose them together. But I don't do a ton of that. Usually I like to shoot how things are going to end up. Sometimes I will, though, just in RAW, say I overexposed an image or something like that, I might bring down the exposure in RAW and then open the image and then for the background, and then I will bring it up in RAW and then open both of those images in Photoshop and then put them together so you get, you know, a more clean background. So sometimes I do it that way, like taking two images and combining, you know, if I had some user error with lighting and whatnot. But usually I pretty much shoot how I want them to end up, if that makes sense.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Another question, are you working with a lot of hot lights since you do both video and photo? And is there a time, you know, how do you split that up between strobe and hot light?
Yeah, so the way that we work, usually if we're shooting just stills, a lot of times we'll use strobes. But now that we're doing so much video and still on the same shoot, like for that commercial, we do use hot lights. We'll use like the low ID lights. You know, if we're doing a bigger production, we get to use the RE M18s. Those are incredible. You know, they're so bright. It's almost like putting the sun wherever you want it. But you know, the constant light I love, because what you see is what you get. And with strobe, it's different because you have to meter and everything like that. So I actually love using constant lights. I love lighting in that way and use constant lights as much as possible. So yeah, that's a very good question. Love the
last question, and this is something that we run into occasionally as university photographers.
Yeah.
Is you get any pushback from the fake science? Like you went in and created something there, but it doesn't look like real science. Do you get pushback on that?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, for that commercial, we didn't. They were excited. The whole like vibe of that commercial, they wanted everything very centered, like Wes Anderson. You know how Wes Anderson films are always very centered, and that sort of perpetual zoom. So with what I do, I'm always creating like the ideal scenario. I'm not really a photojournalist as much, but I haven't gotten any pushback from the university about lighting things in different ways and stuff like that. I think they like that sort of mood that we created. But that's a really good question, because I guess you would have to ask. It'd be a good thing to ask before you start lighting. Obviously, we spent about an hour lighting that situation. So yeah, that's a good question.
So Evan has a question about the commercial. What says, awesome commercial. Thanks for sharing. What challenges did you have have to negotiate and pitch your storyboard with the producers and clients / ad agency?
Yeah, that's always a tricky balance. It was funny for that commercial. You know, we try to find the right students for each scenario. And for instance, the violinist, you know what, I don't know that they even, that particular cut, she wasn't even in that particular one, but we did shoot her. And I had actually found a great violinist. She didn't go to TCU, but what I didn't realize until after the fact that we shot her was that she went to the other college that's like TCU's rival. She went to SMU. And so we actually had to reshoot another violinist because they were so scared that SMU would be like, wow, TCU doesn't have any good violinists. So they had to use an SMU violinist. So that's kind of some things that come up, I feel like, that you have to deal with accordingly. I wish I had known that she went to SMU before the shoot. I should have asked that. But for this particular shot, we actually worked with an ad agency for that particular commercial, and we were very aligned in the vision. The perpetual zooms were really hard in the editing process. We did some dolly moves throughout, but we had to figure out how to edit those to create those more perpetual zooms. So that was kind of a learning curve, but it's always a delicate balance. I tend to sandwich my criticism. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the criticism sandwich. Yeah. But basically, this is how I work with people. People take criticism better if you will say a positive first, so the bread of the sandwich. So I will say, for instance, if the hair and makeup isn't working, I'll say, hey, you know, the eye makeup looks great. And then the next is the meat, and that's where you share your criticism. And you say, you know, the hair isn't looking quite right. You know, we need to tweak that. And then at the end, you add another compliment or another positive statement, which is, hey, I think everything's gonna look amazing, after we get this all dialed in. And people are more receptive to receiving criticism in that way. So I always tend to work with people that way. So that's a really good way to try to communicate your vision. And sometimes you really have to capture what they want, and then sometimes I'll have to capture what I want at the end. And usually they end up choosing what I went with because I have a feeling, I have a knowing for what they're looking for. But it's all a dance. It's kind of a delicate balance of working with people and keeping it positive. That's all very good questions though. Yeah. Okay. So with lifestyle photography, I love to be really capturing and in these moments. This was for the D56 or D5500 campaign for Nikon. We ended up, casting these college students actually as models. They didn't want paid, talent that was from an agency. They wanted real people, real fun folks. So we ended up casting them at a local college in Colorado. And I just remember I wanted to capture this image. So we actually had them driving, and I was sitting in the back of the convertible with the wide lens shooting as we're driving along the way. So with lifestyle photography, I really kind of feel like you almost have to be in the moment. Like a lot of times I'll be very interactive. I'll be walking as I'm shooting, I'll be talking as I'm shooting to capture the moments. But basically I like to compose the background first of these images, and then I set the models up in the scenario. So for instance, this was the best angle on this particular campaign. This was for Margaritaville. It's like a hotel that we shot for recently. And so I had two of the models, lounge, and I said, just talk to each other and lounge. And then I'll direct the other two talent to basically walk back and forth behind them as I'm shooting. So I basically capture them in action. So with lifestyle photography, I feel like the real key to it is giving people an action, especially people that aren't, real models and things like that. So I have them high five, and some of the shots will look super cheesy, but then you'll end up with some where they become supernatural as you're shooting. So I'm not afraid to burn some digital files, and in the process of capturing those really natural type of moments. So I actually shot this with the D5. It's got 14 frames per second, so you can capture things so fast. It sounds like a machine gun when you shoot, but it's really fun to capture people in their environment that way. So I just basically have them run back and forth towards camera. I have them run away from me. Capturing those kind of natural movements. A lot of times to create movement with the hair, we'll actually use this is a leaf blower, battery operated leaf blower. So believe it or not, this is how we created his hair because there was no wind this day. So I had my assistant grab the leaf blower and just blow his hair in the shot to create a little bit of movement. But we use this all the time. It's funny because I've actually seen them use these leaf blowers on big productions like for Victoria's Secret and stuff like that to get the hair movement. So it really kind of gives it that really lifestyle type of look.
Dixie,
Yeah.
that actually brings up one of the questions, thinking about planning for it, you didn't know there wasn't going to be any wind there. Jessica asks, how much time do you spend preparing for your average photo shoot?
Yeah, gosh. It really depends on what the shoot is. Like for this particular shoot, I was actually speaking I was with Chris this shoot. I was speaking at Daytona College, and when I travel, I like to reach out to local models and things like that so we can do a test shoot, like a portfolio shoot. And so this one was actually planned within 2 days. So, I wanted him to play that surfer role. He's not even actually a real surfer. But I knew he said he had a Jeep and he brought all these different things to work with. So this shoot was planned very quickly. Now, when we shoot like a big campaign or something like that, that may be planned a month or two in advance, especially if it's a multi-day production, just to plan out all the shots per day. Because with hiring a crew and everything, you have to be very diligent on scheduling because, the budget adds up quickly when you start scheduling more and more days. But yeah, it really just depends on how much time we're given. Sometimes photo shoots, like recently, a few months ago, Nikon asked if I would create some cool shots with a bag, and they reached out on Wednesday and they needed the images by that following Monday. So it really just depends on how much time we're given, but we always figure out a way to make it happen. Good question there.
And two more questions that are in that same vein. Karen and Courtney both asked about stylists. Do you usually work with a stylist, or do you do most of the styling? If so, do you have a process for styling and creating beautiful images?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was first starting out, it was only me and the model. I would do the hair and makeup, which was scary because I'm not very good at that. And then I would also do the wardrobe styling, and I would always over style, and I'm not a stylist. There is such an art to styling. So for different shoots that I do, especially if it's more high fashion type of stuff, I always try to, at least if we can't get a stylist, at least to find a local designer that will provide wardrobe. Stylists can be expensive if it's not for a portfolio shoot. I mean, they run $750 a day. So if it's for a commercial client, that's totally fine. Like, they'll pay for the stylist. If it's for a portfolio shoot, sometimes I'll end up styling my own and then reaching out. I'll usually reach out to a local designer, say, hey, you know, would love to collaborate on a shoot. You know, you find them on Instagram and stuff like that. But it kind of comes with looking through tons and tons of fashion magazines to start kind of getting good at styling. I started out not very good at all. I've gotten a little bit better. I kind of tend to keep it more simple when I do the styling. Like for this shoot, obviously there wasn't a lot of styling. He was in like a wetsuit and basically a surfboard, and that was really pretty simple in that way. But for high fashion, it's important to work with a designer. And then also when you're working with a wardrobe stylist, they will pull a lot more looks than you actually need, just in case certain things don't fit. And they'll pull accessories, and they'll pull a lot of things. A lot of times they will actually go to stores and purchase things from stores and return it after. I know that sounds terrible, but it's very normal in the fashion industry to work that way. Is how we get the really cool outfits and stuff for different shoots.
Along that same line, creative directors and art directors, do you typically work with the creative directors or direct the shoot on your own? And then if you have a second, speak about the research for mood boards and how you do some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the shoots that we do that are big commercial jobs, we will usually have a creative director, and they are very hands-on. A lot of times they will actually create the mood board for you. And it's always really nice when they use your images from your website for the mood board, because then you know that they're hiring to shoot your style. But a lot of times they'll find images from magazines, from, you know, if you use Google image search, I use that a lot. I use Pinterest a lot. But a lot of times they'll do the mood board, and then I have to kind of follow that direction. So with personal shoots, I come up with the mood board or vision board, and I actually use a cork board to do these. So I'll tear images out of a magazine and put them on with a tack, and that board will serve as our direction for the day. So I always do that for every single shoot that I do, because you can communicate all day what, you know, hair and makeup you're looking for, but until someone actually sees it in a picture, it's really hard to communicate. I communicate much better with pictures than I do communicating with words. So they definitely play a huge role, but I use Pinterest a lot and a lot of magazines, Google image search. So we utilize that a lot. Did I use?
Speaking of social media, there's a question from Bobby asking, reaching out on via Instagram as you travel. How many shoots do you do that's just a trade-off for each other's portfolio versus paid shoots?
A lot.
Anything for an ad campaign or ad is paid, but just finding people on Instagram, what's the usual deal that's being made?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. If I'm reaching out on Instagram and I want to do collaborative shoot, usually we are all working for free for the images. So this particular shoot that you're seeing on the screen was that situation. What's really cool is when the model books campaigns off of the images that we shot, which he has, and so have I. So really it's kind of like paying it forward. You show the type of work that you ultimately want to shoot. I've always done my career that way. So I started out shooting weddings and portraits and things like that. I'm terrible at shooting weddings. That's like the hardest kind of photography there is because there's so much stress involved. But so when I started, I had 2 separate websites. I had a wedding website and then I had a commercial website. And when I started out, all the commercial work that I was showing wasn't actually for commercial clients because obviously I didn't have those clients yet. So I had to go out and shoot the type of work that I wanted to be shooting. And I would kind of showcase different products and things as mock ads on the website. But then that it has a way of attracting you to the kind of clients that you ultimately want to shoot for because you're showing what it is that you want to shoot. So that's really the biggest kind of game in this industry. It's you almost have to go out and shoot it first and then show it to art buyers, to creative directors, creating meetings and stuff with these folks to show your work. And then it's really nice with Instagram because I feel like I get a lot of jobs via Instagram as well. So it's kind of comes full circle, but it's always building that portfolio is such a huge part of it. So I'm always trying to shoot personal work like that. Yeah. All right. So just creating an action is such a big part of these. Like this is one of the first test shoots that I did. And, just having people, directing them to walk away and then walk towards each other and give each other a big hug, like just creating that action is really important. This was a really fun shoot. And this dog, actually the dog's name's Dixie. It was kind of serendipitous, but it showed up and I didn't really realize that the owner would bring all kinds of outfits for it. So, some things happen like that serendipitous that ended up being meant to be. And I'm actually standing in the water here capturing the dog, in action. So they're really fun to create. And all these, are very, most of them are natural light. These are all natural light here. But we can also create sort of lifestyle type of imagery inside. So this was for a client, Virgin, Richard Branson's, he has so many companies. It was Virgin Pulse, and it's like a healthcare side of Virgin. And so they wanted me to capture, the art director wanted me to capture basically people having fun in the office, and they wanted lens flare in every shot. So it was weird creating lens flare inside of a building, but basically the way that you do that is you take a strobe and have it somewhere kind of out off camera, and then you shine the strobe towards your lens, and it will basically create that flare for you. And then also to accentuate it, I even put a filter on my lens and then put Vaseline on the bottom of it, because when the light hits it, it creates even more flare. So we're using that. Never put Vaseline on your lens, by the way, but just put it on a filter because you will never get that off. So I have some dedicated filters that I use for the Vaseline. But really and truly, this video showcases what it's like on how I work with real people on set. So you can kind of get an idea of, giving them actions. So we did a lot of dancing. I'm a terrible dancer, but I'll dance on set if I have to get people going.
When I want to be first, because I want to move forward, but I'm stuck in reverse. We keep on running the clock, but it only gets worse, and it hurts, and it hurts, and it hurts. I thought I knew the whole thing, but I was wrong the whole time. I kept on losing my place, cause I was stuck in rewind instead of leaving the path. I found I'm falling behind, but I was blind, I was blind, I was blind. Spinning too fast, and while I know I might like to, I can't change the past, and now I'm traveling forward, facing the facts with the wind in my back. Oh, it's not the decision, not the decision. Oh, the heart is on a mission, heart is on a mission. because I want to move forward, but I'm stuck in reverse. You keep on winding the clock, but it only gets worse and it hurts. Yeah, it hurts.
So you can kind of see how we, oh, thank you guys, how we work on set. There's a lot of dancing involved. There's a lot of interaction. And when we're not filming sound, I always have music playing. I think that's a really big part of setting people at ease, is getting that music going. So I will literally Google and research whoever models that I'm going to be shooting. I'll research them and see kind of what they're like and what their interests are. And then if I can find their favorite music, I always try to have that music playing when they arrive, because it just kind of sets them at ease. And so I have like a little speaker that I bring with me. Sometimes I even just put it in my backpack when I'm just walking around. So it's kind of like I have my own boot box as I'm shooting, and it kind of sets people at ease. So
Dixie,
yeah.
that brings up a question that several people have had. I'll read the one that Sam gave us. In addition to giving direction on action, how do you create a sense of friendship and connection between strangers? And this comes from, we're working with a lot of people who are not models.
Yeah.
How do you create that authenticity?
Absolutely. So, when I first get a client request or something like that, obviously I'm creating that connection with the ad agency. So I always try to get people on the phone. I know that we are all very much into, texting and emails and stuff like that, but there's never anything as good as getting people on the phone or getting them in person. So I usually will try to meet with clients, if it's a local client, in person for coffee. And I'm not just going to ask them questions about the shoot. I really kind of want to get to know who they are and what their interests are, because that is going to keep the clients coming back. When you create that really beautiful, positive experience and they have fun in the process, that's really what keeps the clients coming back, and it creates an enjoyable situation on set. Because the thing is if photography is super stressful the day of the shoot, and you're just super stressed out, you should be in a different field. Part of photography is really having fun and enjoying the process and creating that experience for people. So I really go to great lengths. I always try to have snacks. People get super hangry when they're not fed. So if it's a long shoot day or something like that, I'll try to have snacks. And then we always obviously have meals if it's like a 10-hour day that we're shooting. But just creating those moments where you can really get to know the people as a person before the shoot, I think is really important. If you have the luxury of doing that, at least getting them on the phone is really important. So, yeah. So this was actually shot in Orlando, and, just like I said, creating that action. This was sort of a fun story, vintage type of fashion editorial story. And so I'll literally have them walk towards me, I want to say like 20 times, and to get that natural shot. So I may have shot 100 frames to get this natural kind of element to the images. This is all natural light and creating these portraits. So there was actually I'm standing outside of this huge hangar, and there was a cutout, like a garage cutout. So we ended up positioning the plane near the other side to get the whole plane in the picture. And then they're actually very close to, I call this garage light. Like some of the best lighting is in your garage. So if you literally open your garage door and then you stand right outside the garage shooting in, this is one of my absolute favorite lighting to do because that natural light just wraps around your subject's face really nicely. So that's kind of how a lot of times I end up using natural lighting. And then this is just at the end of the day, like a silhouette type of look for these images. But this is also natural light. So with men, instead of shooting straight on, so the light wraps around your subject, you can actually side light them. And it brings out some texture and stuff in their skin, which makes them look a little bit more rugged. With women, I don't like to do that because women usually tend to like to look very porcelain and soft, but with guys, you can kind of bring out their texture, like, and make them look more manly. So you can see the lighting coming from the left side of this particular shot. So creating those portraits in that way can be really effective. Like this was an album cover that I shot, and none of these are models. One thing about posing people for, environmental portraits, think about creating shapes with their arms and their limbs and things like that, because really and truly you want to control the viewer's eye in the photograph. So for instance, the violin shot, she's kind of framing her own face with the violin and with her arms. You can see how your eyes just follow the shapes back to her eyes. So that's kind of how I tend to create like triangles with people's bodies and things. And also S curves are really helpful if you're working with models. Like the girl on the right kind of creates a pretty S curve. So keeping them really involved in that way and kind of trying to shoot through moments. So when I'm photographing, I tend to overshoot. Like I'll shoot through the moment until I get like a natural look. And then, I'll always feel when I've captured that image. So this was for Disney and Nikon. This was a really fun shoot. We were up at 4 a.m. On set, and Disney Castle was such a crazy experience. They actually can change the color of the castle via an iPad. So the guy was like, "What color would you like the castle today, Dixie?" And I said, "I don't know, what are the options?" And he showed me pink and all these different colors. Man, it was incredible getting to work with Disney. But yeah, so giving them an action, even giving Mickey an action. So I actually had these kids stand behind me, and then I told them, okay, on 3, I want you guys to go give a huge hug to Mickey. And so then I'll count to 3, and then I capture that whole moment. And so you get really natural type expressions within that. So I'm going to get more into lighting now, if that's cool. Do you have any questions on the personality and capturing that?
There's just one quote comment or question in here that might work with this. Interesting to hear Dixie talk more about the tonal palette of her final work, high key style. She just talked about strobe flare and Vaseline filters. When to go black and white, how much in camera versus post-production, plus the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I shoot pretty much how I want it to end up being, but I do some interesting post-processing. So I actually cull through my images using Adobe Bridge. I know all you guys are probably already Lightroom and everything, so I haven't learned Lightroom. So I use Adobe Bridge to choose the images, and then I'll take them into obviously Camera Raw and do all the basics like the lighting, bringing back the shadows and things like that and the highlights. And then I'll open them in Photoshop, and usually I just do a light retouch on the skin. I used to over retouch people's skin. Like you don't want to do that. I like more of a natural look. But I do that using like the clone and the healing brush. And then a lot of times I'll use split tones. Do you guys know what split tones are? So it's basically coloring your shadows a certain color and your highlights a certain color. So like for this particular image, I actually color the shadows more of a purple feel, and then made the highlights more of a warm kind of golden feel. So I'm doing that a lot now. I'm playing with that because it kind of adds a really nice color palette to the images. And I use sometimes, it's called Luminar it's like a $50 program that you can download, and then you can use your split tones. It like does it all automatically within that program. You can open it within Photoshop. So I kind of do a lot of things via Luminar, and then I save it obviously as a TIFF file. So those are kind of my basic editing. It really kind of depends on, what the final look is supposed to be, but that's kind of my basic process.
One more interacting question. Can you share some of the prompts you used for natural expressions and emotions in your subjects?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know what? It's funny. I feel like wedding photographers are really good at prompts. I don't as much use prompts. I don't have go-to, but I usually just like to just giving the person an action. So, well, I do some prompts. Let me think. So when a model is trying to create this, like for instance, for this particular picture, you know, you kind of get that sensual type of vibe. So I'll have the model close her eyes, and then I'll tell her, okay, I want you to open your eyes on 3, like slightly tilt your head down a little bit, because it kind of creates that sensuality when you tilt your head down and look up towards the camera. And then I tell her to open her eyes on 3 and just really talk to the camera like you're talking to a person. So that's kind of how I tend to get the really beautiful, sensual type expressions for like lingerie photography and stuff like that. And then for people that I'm just trying to get a lifestyle look, I'll actually be talking to them as I shoot, or I'll even have like my assistant, I'll be like, okay, I want you guys to talk about a certain subject, and then they'll start laughing and stuff like that as they're talking to each other, and then I'll capture that. And then also you can have your whole crew, you know, if you want to create a really like loud laughing type of expression, I'll tell the crew, I said, okay, I want everyone to laugh on 3. And it looks really cheesy at first, but the ending shots of that end up being really natural because people are actually laughing at each other for laughing. So those are kind of, they probably look pretty hilarious to like an outsider, but those are some of the prompts that I'll use. So, yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. So lighting in photography is everything. I love lighting. And I think it really is the love language of photography. You can really make someone look amazing in a photo, and you can also make them look not so amazing in a photo depending on how you light them. And so I use a lot of natural light to create these kind of natural images. So these are the basic settings that I use. So I'm usually trying to control the lighting. Like I always try to shoot, you know, an hour or 2, you know, after sunrise, or an hour or 2 before sunset. And then midday, when it's so unflattering, when you get those harsh shadows under people's eyes, I usually try to find shade, or we create our own shade. And then we'll bounce light back into it if we want to create more contrast. But sometimes you don't have the luxury of shade. And when you don't, I always try to position the sun slightly behind them. Like this shot on the right was actually shot at like high noon, but the sun is slightly behind him, so it's still flattering on his face. So then I'll try to also overexpose my skin tones by about 1/3 a stop, just so it cleans up their faces and their skin a little bit. So you can do less retouching after the fact. So like I said, with guys, you can kind of use side lighting, brings out abs and skin, you know, there's cool skin tone and stuff. With women, I usually don't like to light like this. I usually like to have more of a subdued look. So this was actually, I put her kind of in the shade, and then we bounced a reflector back in to bounce that sunlight back into her face. So it kind of creates that beautiful look. And then to create that look where the gown is flowing, I'll have my assistant throw it up in the air like 20 times to create that movement to get that sort of look. Yeah. And this was an interesting shot. This is all natural light as well. And we had just a bunch of fabric that we had the stylist shake a bunch of times to create that movement. And then I take a lot of frames to capture that one image where it looks really natural. So natural light is such a great tool. I use backlight all the time, so the sun is coming from the back. And then you could even, for this particular shot, I used my pop-up flash to bounce a little bit of light back into her face for this particular image. And it just creates a really natural look. I actually tend to like to use reflectors more. Like this is shot with a reflector in the front and just the sun coming from the back. It just is really flattering for faces and for skin tones and things like that. So I obviously love lens flare. I feel like with lifestyle photography, it gives it that extra look of naturalness. So you can actually either, like I said, use the Vaseline, or you can also use older lenses, like the Nikkor 180 lens is actually the one that I used for this. And since it doesn't have the nano coating, it actually creates more lens flare, which is technically an imperfection, but I like the imperfection and the look of it. So sometimes I'll use that, like an older lens, like the 180, to create that sort of more natural vibe. This was a recent shoot that, gosh, it was in California, beautiful location. And the sun is kind of coming from the back, but you can also see that we have quite a lot of light on her face. So this is actually how we lit this. I don't know if you guys have used reflectors. I'm sure you guys use reflectors all the time. So when we're on set, we don't use the flimsy reflectors. We actually will use insulation board. So it's like this. So you go to your hardware store and you can just grab, hopefully you can grab the one without the logo on there, and it's just basically a white on one side and silver on the other. But this is what we're using on most productions because it's not as flimsy. And you can see how it kind of creates that nice light. We always try to fill from the sun side as opposed to having it like on the left. So it looks more natural that way, as opposed to, you know, having it fill from the opposite side of the sun. We have it kind of along the lines of where the sun is. So it looks a little bit more natural and less lit, if that makes sense. So all of these are created that way. Really pretty lighting. So this is using strobe, and this is a really fun tool if you guys are trying to light and create a little bit more depth to your images. We actually put a strobe behind the tree and then shined it on the back of her so you can see the light coming through her dress and on her hair as well. So we actually kind of, similar to how we shot the Virgin campaign, you just shine that light opposite from you and shine it towards your camera. It just creates like kind of a cool haze to the image. This is actually for the Transportation Authority. So people having fun riding transportation like buses and stuff like that. And we lit this the exact same way. We'll have lights outside of the bus shining in and towards my camera, and creates that kind of cool haze. Just very simple shot. So really you just need one light for this type of setup. And it just creates that natural, it looks like sunlight. You would think that it was sunlight. So it just creates that natural type of look.
Dixie, that brings up a question of how big is your crew? I mean, you can only use a few lights for this sort of thing. How many people do you have there helping you with everything?
Gosh, for this shoot, we did video and stills. We probably had, I want to say 20 people on set, believe it or not, as simple as this is. We're shooting both stills and video. So for each of these shots, we had a video component and a still component. So I have my lighting guy. I always try to have him on shoots because it makes my job so much easier to focus on the models and getting that interaction. But we'll have the stylist, we'll have the hair and makeup. We had so many models with this particular shoot. We have a producer who's actually on staff. I just hired her full-time like about a year ago, and she will basically do all the invoicing, the setting up schedules and hiring models and things like that. I used to do all that myself, and I still do some of it, but it's a lot of people when you count like the ad agency, the models, the hair and makeup, the wardrobe, the creative director. It starts adding up quickly. But now for personal shoots, it will sometimes just be me and my assistant. Just capturing, you can capture the same quality images with you and assistant as you can with a large crew. Sometimes just with commercial productions, you're on such a tight schedule and everything is so particular and they want the wardrobe a certain way and all this type of thing that you kind of need that crew. But when you're just shooting personal work and stuff like that, you can keep it really simple with just one assistant. So that's actually how I tend to like to work. I really try to keep it as small as possible because I feel like you can get more of a connection with the people when you don't have such a big crew. So these are actually shot very naturally with a strobe. So basically, if you have a white wall to work with, bounce that strobe off, face the white wall, the strobe facing the white wall, and the light will bounce off that white wall and back into your subject, and it creates a really overall soft effect as opposed to shining the light right on your subject. So that's a really great way to light models and things like that. And this is shot the same way. She had like lights all around her, or not lights, like a white background and white walls. And it just creates a really soft kind of ethereal effect when you bounce it off of a white wall, as opposed to shining it directly on your subjects. So that kind of creates a really, really cool look about it.
While you're talking about modifying light, Autumn has a question. She says, any modifiers on the light coming through the tree on that last shot? Also, what modifiers are you using to mimic the natural light on the bus?
Yeah, so actually, believe it or not, we're using a bare bulb on all of those. So with the bus, when you're shining it right towards the camera, the bare bulb works best. So there's no modifier on it. And with like the Z7, it's really nice because with strobe, you can kind of see what the lighting is going to be with mirrorless. So I love using, when I'm shooting strobes, the Z7 is really important because I can see what it's going to kind of look like, because it automatically registers with the strobe to see what the light's going to look like. But yeah, we're using pretty much bare bulb for this shot as well when you're bouncing it off a white wall. Now, if you're shining it directly on a subject, oops, I'll have like a beauty dish and using those modifiers like that. I'll actually get into more modifiers here in a moment, so you can kind of see that type of look. Yeah, those are great questions. So window light, use a lot of window light, like I was talking about earlier. Just, I like to have my back towards the window and then shoot in towards my subject. And then that creates that really beautiful, soft type of effect. It's really flattering, really beautiful. So you can see how when the window is parallel to my subject, you get a shadow on one side of the face. So that can also be really beautiful, depending on what you're capturing. It really brings out a little bit more texture in the garments and things, but it will also bring out more texture in your model's skin. So you have to just be aware of that. You're gonna have to do some retouching in that way. And then sometimes I like to get super creative. This is shooting through a crystal. So I actually use these. They're called fractal filters. And you hold it in front of one side of your lens and it creates this cool like effect where it's just really neat. You get some nice reflections and things like that. So I love using those type of things for, fashion photography and sometimes lifestyle. So this is all window light. I actually created that haze coming through the window in post-production using that Luminar software. You can create these nice beams of light in post-production if you don't want to have to use a fog machine. I like to create it in camera as much as possible, but sometimes it's nice to be able to do that after the fact. Shooting through windows can be really fun to create that real cool ethereal look. You can also carve out people's faces using either adding light with reflectors or taking away light. So instead of using a reflector, so on the left here is just like basic natural light. And I wanted to bring out his jawline. So I put 2 black cards on both sides of his face, just out of the frame. You see, you get more of a shading effect on his face. And that's just all using natural lighting. So you can really carve out people's jawlines and things like that using natural light and using like a black card for that type of thing. So like I talked about earlier, constant light's a really amazing tool. We use a lot of LEDs, for instance, for these type of shots. These are all beauty shots. We built our own light that you can create using these, they're basically overhead like workbench lights. And it creates a really beautiful like soft light source. You have to have a lot of outlets or plugs for it, but there's a lot of different ways you can create really inexpensive light sources for inside. And you can see how it just is really soft. It's really beautiful type of lighting. So we like to get creative. This client didn't have a big budget for lighting, so we created our own essentially. And so, my assistant and I all work together to build those. These Stella Pros are really cool. They're constant light source. They're waterproof and shockproof. But basically you can use an LED just spotlit on your model to create that beautiful kind of look. And it just kind of creates a little bit more contrast. This was for an Audrey Hepburn style editorial that we shot, which was a really fun project. These are all using just simple little LEDs. So you can either have it on a stand if you don't have an assistant, or you can have your assistant hold, the LEDs. This is using a big REM 18 lights. So this is definitely at a point where you want to have an assistant to help you because they are extremely heavy. I don't have big guns to carry around a big light like that. So it's really helpful. So this was another project that we did. I directed the video for the football games, you know, the video they play for all the football games before the pump up video, forget what you call that. So we ended up shooting in the locker room. We got a fog machine. And then again, I'm using that same way of lighting, of putting the light behind my subject and shining it towards camera. So this was a shot the same way. This is a still from the video. It's not an actual still shot, but you guys can kind of see that here. All right. Probably woke you guys up a little bit. So yeah, that was a compilation of a lot of game footage and stuff like that, and then also footage that we've directed with the students. So it's kind of a compilation of all of that. So, all right. Do you guys have questions over natural light or anything, or am I good to get into strobe?
A couple of questions. One in terms of equipment. How much of your equipment are you renting?
Oh, how much are we renting?
Yeah.
Yes, so it really depends. I actually started out, I didn't own any lighting gear. All I owned was my camera gear, and I would always have, you know, at least 2 cameras. You always want to have one camera and then one backup camera. I currently actually travel with four bodies. I'm a little overkill probably on that a little bit, but since we're doing both video and still, I just like to have a backup camera for each. And then, so I own all of my camera gear. And then I actually didn't ever have lighting until about 4 years ago. ProPhoto ended up licensing one of my images for their catalog. And they said, hey, either we can pay you a licensing fee, or, you know, we can give you a kit, you know, a lighting kit. And so since I didn't have lighting, I went ahead and went for the kit. So I just have one ProPhoto kit with 2 B1s and extra batteries that I travel with. So if it's just shooting stills and fashion, we can usually pull things off with that amount of gear. If it's a bigger production with like a big video production, a lot of times we'll have to rent a lot of those big constant lights like the REM 18 or you know, the different big modifiers and barn doors and stuff like that. So it really kind of depends on their budget. If they have a lighting budget, then it also depends on how simple the shoot is. I try to keep things as simple as possible, obviously to save on budget, but it really kind of depends on the shoot a lot of times. Yeah.
One more, this is a little bit of switching gears, but one more question before we go to strobe. On these videos that you've done for TCU, are you hiring an editor? Are you editing it and giving them a finished project? Darren's want to know if the school edits them or if you do it.
Yeah, so I don't personally edit the video. I will capture everything. I'll direct everything during the shoot. So I'll stand next to my camera operator and he'll be manning the camera. And if I'm shooting stills, I'll be shooting stills. So usually we'll shoot the stills first and then the video. But with like the TCU ones, we shot video first. And then, you know, that was the main focus. And then I'd spend 10 minutes shooting some stills. So basically, we'll come home, get all the footage, and then I will usually sit with the editor and they will grab all the good footage, and then I'll just sit there, basically art direct with my editor on, like, I'll pick the song that I want them to use, kind of the timing that I'm thinking of, like a fast pace or more slow pace type of video. And then I'll sit with them as they edit, and then we'll usually make changes, go to the client, say, hey, you guys liking this? And then the client will give feedback and we'll make more changes. So really, I'm just kind of art directing. I actually don't do the video editing. I may at some point in the future, but currently I get to work with some really great editors that specialize in that. So that's what's really cool about this industry is if you don't, for instance, if that's not your specialty, you can hire people, you know, if you get a really great production to come in and help you. Like for some reason, you know, for some shoots we'll hire a drone operator because that's not my cup of tea. I have a drone, but I'm not the one operating it. So yeah, all right. We'll get into strobe a little bit. So these are the basic strobe settings that I'm usually using. For the shutter speed, unless we're using high speed sync, I'll do like 1/250th on the Nikons. And then I'm always choosing the aperture based on how much of the image that I want in focus. So for instance, if I'm shooting like a jewelry ad, I might shoot at f11 or f16 because I want the jewelry and the model's face in focus. If I'm shooting portraits, I might shoot at like f2.8 or f3.5 to really blur everything out and just their eyes are tack sharp. So that's kind of how I tend to shoot. And like with the giraffe shoot, I want to shoot a little bit more stop down to get the giraffe in focus. So just keeping those things in mind. I always like to keep a low ISO if possible. And you can really do that with strobe. And then just kind of learning one light at a time. I mean, I started out just shooting natural light and then I would add one strobe and see all the different ways that I could shoot just a strobe. So this is the studio kit that we're usually working with. It's like the D1s, which now they have upgraded versions. But just keeping it really simple. Like this is just a simple shoot through umbrella, and creating that beautiful soft lighting. Umbrellas are really they kind of throw light everywhere, but it can be really beautiful for that type of look, and keeping it simple. The beauty dish is a lot more contrasty. If you're using a beauty dish and shining it directly on your model, I always like to have it slightly off so the hot spot is not right on the model. So I'll have it slightly off kilter to create this kind of look where it's a little bit sharp, it's a little bit soft kind of vibe. I always say to get the beauty dishes with the white interior as opposed to the silver, because I find that the silver is just a little bit too contrasty and it's a little bit more harsh. So if you're shooting a guy, that's fine, but with women, I like that soft look. And if you put a sock over it, basically that's just going to soften it like a softbox. You can also use a grid, which is going to keep the light more focused. So it's going to look a little bit more contrasty. So just keeping those in mind. We use beauty dishes quite a lot for what we do. Like I said, umbrellas, really simple tool. Sometimes I like the white one that you can shoot through to create this type of look. So it's just slightly like at a 45-degree angle. And it kind of creates that cool look where she's floating. So I used Vaseline again at the bottom of the filter to create this type of look where she's floating. You can obviously do that in post-production. I just love to do that in camera. And then I was playing in Photoshop one evening, ended up with this kind of cool look that the designer really liked. But this is all just that one umbrella, that one shoot through umbrella, keeping it really simple. I'm very simple in the way that I tend to shoot. Because I'm not a super technical person, I like to keep the lighting as simple as possible. This was shot with just a softbox, and you can see it's not straight on, it's more off to the side, like a 45-degree angle, and it creates a nice little shadow, you know, on his jawline. It's really simple. So this one is with women, I stand in front of like a big octabank and then shoot into them, and it just creates this nice it kind of mirrors like natural light or garage light when you shoot that way. And then I love kind of creating some cool highlights on their jawlines. So for men and women, you can add 2 strip boxes on the side, and you can meter them a little bit hotter than the main light. So for instance, I think on this shot, I metered the side lights at like f11, so it's going to be brighter than your main light. I think I shot the main light at f8, so then you get those nice little highlights on the edges. So this is all softbox. Kathy Ireland, I got to shoot her recently this is for the AIDS Foundation. She was amazing to work with. She's like an icon in the industry, but just keeping it really simple. We shot this very similar to this type of shot. So these type of images with the strobe. So here's basically the setup for this type of look. You can see the camera is right in front of the octo, and then you have two strips on the side to create the highlights on his jawline. And then if you want a white background, you want to obviously overexpose your background by about a stop. If you're wanting that crisp white look, you don't want to overexpose it by more than a stop because you're going to start getting lens flare. So just keeping that in mind for that type of lighting. So this is a really great commercial way to light if you want more of a lit kind of look. And this is
Asher has a question about your use of grids on softboxes. What's your philosophy behind that, or your practice?
Yeah, basically grids are going to focus your light a little bit more, and we do use those on occasion to make it a little bit more contrasty. But usually, I would say 90% of the time I'm not using grids. It's just a personal preference kind of thing. But sometimes with the beauty dish, we will use it to focus the light a little bit more. It creates where it's not as much fall off, if you will. But it does create more of a contrasty look for commercial type of images. So I definitely think it's a great tool. We just don't use it as much for fashion because I tend to kind of like a little bit of fall off.
And a follow-up question from Asher, how often do you meter your lighting? Do you use an actual light meter?
I do. I have a Sekonic light meter, and I'll literally meter the back. Well, first you want to meter your background to get it all perfect, like f11 across, and then I'll meter the edge lights, and then I'll meter the front light, the main light. So you want to meter everything separately and then meter it together. But it's funny because my lighting guy, who I work with a lot, he doesn't use a meter, but he's been doing lighting for 20 years. So I think he just has like a internal knowing about lights. But for me, I like using a meter because I know everything's set correctly and whatnot. But keep in mind that you don't actually have to, like, so if, for instance, if I meter something and the meter says, shoot this at f8, I may shoot it at a slightly different setting to overexpose a little bit to clean up some skin tones. So you don't actually have to go exactly with what the meter says. You really have to look at the final image to decide where you want it to be. So I would say use your eye more than a meter, but a meter is a really great starting point. So that's kind of how I tend to light. Yeah. This is all shot the same way, basically, with that big octobank. And one other tool that's really great if you're shooting a white background. So you'll notice that there's a little bit of nice reflection on the bottom of these. And basically, if you go to the hardware store, you can pick up one of these. It's a panel board, and it's very reflective. It's like basically reflective linoleum flooring. And if you put that on the bottom, you're not going to get any footprints, because if you I shoot a lot of lookbooks on a white background, you get all these footprints that you have to edit out in post-production. So if you put this on top of your seamless, it's basically going to reflect any light, and it's going to blow out any footprints, and you can also wipe it off really easily. So it's a really great tool that I use a lot for lookbooks and things like that. So I get a lot of DIY stuff from the hardware store. This shot the exact same way. It's kind of an interesting perspective. Usually I shoot headshots from a high angle, but sometimes it's kind of interesting to play with different angles and things like that. This is a parabolic. Gosh, this is such an amazing light source. I definitely don't own one of these. They're very expensive, but they're great to rent for like hair ads. So basically this is how I shoot using a parabolic. You stand right in front of it, and then that light just wraps around your subject really nicely. And since it has all these things within the light, it really captures like the specular highlights. You'll notice it's slightly off kilter, so it's not directly facing the model, so you don't get that hot spot in the middle. So it's this is kind of how we use the parabolic. We use it quite often for hair commercials and things like that. You can see how it captures some highlights in the hair, and also you get a really nice catch light. It's crazy because with these Nikon files, you can literally zoom into the model's eye and you can see me like shooting in the model's eye. It's really crazy, like how much depth is in the images. So I guess you can kind of see it there. I should have done a zoomed in version of those, but it's a really great tool. So like I said, with jewelry, shooting at f11 and f16 is really, really important because you get the model and the jewelry in focus. So keeping that in mind. And this is also one light. So just the light, 45-degree angle to the side, just a beauty dish, keeping it really simple. It's kind of like a Mad Men kind of look. But it's really nice for portraiture. So this is the location kit that I love to use with the B1s. And so they're all battery operated and very simple to use. It's kind of like plug and play. So like with the Disney shoot, we used a bunch of these just because they're so easy, you don't have to plug them in. And we lit this the exact same way with the light kind of in the background and shooting towards camera, and it highlights their hair and creates a really nice kind of effect. So this is actually, we shot this in Brazil, and this was about 5 minutes before a torrential downpour in Brazil. We had hiked 2 miles to this spot with these sand dunes, and all of a sudden we look back and we can't see the parking lot, and it was just a huge rainstorm. So luckily we had brought a ton of trash bags, so we ended up covering all the lights and all the cameras with a bunch of trash bags, and we're walking and running in from the dunes, just soaking wet. It was a crazy experience, but we definitely got the shots. This was actually for a 22-hour tutorial that I created for Pro EDU. So it's a big, like long, really extensive fashion tutorial. So we got to shoot for 10 days in Brazil. It was a really fun experience. So this is kind of a light setup that we used on set. So you'll see that the beauty dish on the right is called a mola, and it's a little bit softer than your normal beauty dish because it has those rivets in it, and it just creates a nice softer light than your normal beauty dish. So we use the other beauty dish as a hair light, and the mola is the main light to create this type of look where it's just, it looks very natural. It looks like it could be natural light, but you get that nice lighting on her face and kind of lights up her eyes really beautifully. So these were the kind of shots that we created. Everything looks very natural, but yet it's all lit with strobe. I love kind of overexposing that backlight like sunlight, basically. And this is also garage light. So just that light coming through. I'm standing outside of a barn, believe it or not, and then shooting in, that light just wraps around her. So, either whether we're shooting with strobe or with constant light or natural light, it all kind of has a similar look to it depending on the situation. So that was also in Brazil. I think a little bit of the light stand was actually in this shot a little bit, so I had to edit that out in post because it was kind of peeking out of the tree a little bit. And we also used split tones here, so we made the shadows kind of purple and then the model kind of a bronzy color. So I do quite a lot of my own editing, but then sometimes for like beauty stuff, I'll outsource that to a retoucher. I have a couple retouchers that I found on Instagram. I think they're over in like Germany and Sri Lanka. And so I work with a lot of different people. And then a local guy, Pratik, who's a really great retoucher, retouched those. And he also retouched this one. So, it can be very time consuming retouching. So I like to outsource that as much as possible. And then I always do the final color edit myself in post-production. So this is natural light plus strobe. So the natural light coming through her hoodie, and then strobe in the front to fill in that light a little bit. Yeah. Also in Brazil, using that light just out of the frame. You can see the crazy clouds coming in for the rainstorm here, which is about to downpour on us. And then I love experimenting with lighting. And this was a really fun shoot. Basically, we used a bunch of hardware lights and strung them in the background. These are just basic, you know, those lights you use in a garage. And we strung probably about 12 in the background. And then I used basically what are those called? Those 80s filters, the star filters, to create the crazy lighting in this type of shot. So that's really fun. This was actually for an album cover, and I ended up shooting a model friend of mine for this. So you get some really gnarly lens flare. And yes, this breaks all the rules of photography, but if you'll notice in a lot of fashion magazines and things like that, sometimes breaking the rules makes for the coolest images. So we ended up, you know, using these, and the model really liked all these photos. But, you know, the album cover ended up being a really cool album cover, and then capturing movement in this one. A lot of backlighting. We use both constant light and strobe in these. We strobe in the front and constant light in the back. And then obviously that 80s star filter. So getting really creative there. I was actually in band in high school, and I actually played in jazz band in college, but obviously that's not my band uniform, that's the models, but that's my saxophone. So just kind of getting creative and using props that you love is really cool. This is another really fun technique if you want to showcase certain parts. So basically you can cut a shape out of a piece of paper and then shine a light through it and create these cool shapes on your model's faces. So we tried this. This was really fun. I cut out stars and shined a light through it to create the really cool look. It was kind of hard to get the stars perfectly positioned on our eyes, but I love kind of experimenting. For this one, we did a keyhole shape and shined a light through it. You can usually do this with constant light or strobe. For this particular one, we used strobe, and for this one, we used a constant light. So it just looks a little bit sharper with strobe because you're freezing all that motion. But man, just crazy how much detail is in. This was shot with a Z7. I'm always blown away by how much detail is in these files. And I had a client blow this up to be huge, and it's incredible, the cameras that we have to work with today. So you can see just how much detail. The tricky part is you have to be very aware of the retouching, getting everything perfected. So yeah. And then this is using just two side lights, two edge lights. And these were both constant light sources to bring out the texture of the garment. So just trying different things. And this was for a wedding dress client. And then again, using Vaseline. That's one of my favorite things to use. Always love working with that. Shooting through crystals. Like I said earlier, that's a really fun tool to create kind of a fantasy type of effect. Really fun. And more crystals. These crystals work really great for like bridal and things like that. So you can see the bokeh in the front. And actually we used insulation board. You can see how we created sort of a room type of vibe. So we just stood them up on the sides to create that kind of look. Again, I use insulation board a lot. It's a really great tool. And see, we kind of created our own hallway with the insulation board. We put 2 on each side of her and a row of like, I think 8, just standing those up with stands and ladders and stuff. So you can get really creative with stuff from the hardware store. And this is the basic setup for this scenario. So we had crystals that I was shooting through, and then we had the Profoto deep umbrella that we shot, and then the backlight. So it's all very, very soft. And then a lot of insulation board. So this looks a little bit complicated, but it's actually a lot simpler, I guess, than it looks. So yeah. Do you guys have questions on any strobe or anything like that?
I think they've just been soaking it up, but everybody's been enjoying it. We don't have any new questions recently.
Perfect. That's good. Yeah. Oh, so here's the basic lighting setup you can see.
at this cool old historic cotton mill. We're going to be shooting high fashion bridal, and I am so excited. This location is amazing. We'll be using the B1 heads from ProPhoto. It's really nice because they do not have any cords, and so it makes it really easy. You don't have to look for outlets everywhere. So it's going to be a great shoot.
So that was a very fun shoot. That location was beautiful. A lot of times we'll find locations on Airbnb. You can find those a lot cheaper than you can. For instance, a lot of areas have like a location scout company that you can use, but those locations are going to run very expensive. Like I want to say at least $1,500 a day to rent like a big, mansion for the day to shoot in. But if you utilize and find some cool areas on Airbnb, you can get those a lot cheaper for like $150 a night. It's just important to mention that you're going to be shooting at their location. But most of the time, if you're not in like California or New York, a lot of people are excited about it. Like in Texas, people are like, oh, cool, you're doing a photo shoot here. So we utilize a lot of Airbnbs locally for different projects and things like that. So I wanted to get... Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We probably need to wrap it up in about within 5 minutes. So if you just letting you know.
That sounds good. We timed this perfectly then. So the last thing I wanted to just touch on is moving in a little bit. Do you guys do motion video work as well as stills, I'm guessing?
There's a percentage of us do. About a third do a lot, and then another third do some, and another third do none.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, so I feel like with the way the industry's going, I feel like it's going into a lot more motion needed for content and things like that. Because if you're just scrolling through social media and things like that, I feel like video captures people's eyes a lot. So I have most of my clients are wanting both stills and videos on a lot of shoots, from like TCU to different clients. So this particular client, it's called Poopery. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Poopery, but it's basically a high-end bathroom spray, and they actually are in Dallas, and they approached me to shoot and direct their commercial for their kind of high-end line. They have a basic Poopery, and they have a more high-end version of it made with essential oils called Privy. And so they wanted me to shoot and direct this commercial almost like I was directing a perfume ad. So that was the sort of basis they gave me. And I just remember, because they don't have an ad agency, so they actually just said, hey, if you have any ideas, let us know. So I got this idea when I was just brainstorming the night before, and just before the meeting, the pre-production meeting. And this idea came to me, like we should have the model you know, racing to this hotel, and you don't really know why she's in such a hurry, but she's in such a hurry because she has to use the restroom. Obviously it's a bathroom spray. And so I pitched them the idea and they really liked it. And we ended up being able to basically go with my idea and bring it to life at this really cool hotel. This is at the Statler Hotel in Dallas. And we had a really great model involved. You know, they casted their favorite model. She actually showed up on set. We shot until 3 a.m. for this particular shoot. So it was a really long day with video. There's so many things that you have to consider. And then they also wanted stills. So we actually shot the entire video shoot, and then we shot the stills at the very end. So these stills were all shot at like 2 a.m. because we had about an hour to shoot stills. So we used all constant lights for this type of shoot, and then bounced it off of the walls like I brought up earlier. But ultimately the commercial ended up winning some Addy Awards and things like that. So video has been really fun. I think I'm still very new to it. I'm still learning a lot, but it's been a really fun process. So I'll show you guys that before we end.
Bang, bang, boom. I won't be your waiting hand. I won't be your stepping stone. I don't need another man. I can make it on my own. I don't need you to be king. I know how to make my way. The clock is ticking. Time's running out. I feel it shaking. Oh, can you feel it trembling? Can you feel it roll? So tell me, are you ready? How do you like me? I'm gonna make you go bang, bang, boom. I'm gonna make you go bang, bang, boom. Bang, 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 boom, 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 boom. Bang, 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 boom, boom. Are you ready for me? Bang, bang, boom, boom. Are you ready? Bang, bang, bang. I'm gonna make you go bang, bang, boom.
Okay. That was a really fun shoot. Do you guys have any questions before we do the giveaway?
There are a few questions, but I think we're running out of time, so we probably
Okay. No worries.
move on to that.
Feel free to email me as well. You guys have been so great through all this. But yeah, my email is dixie@dixiedixon.com if you have any questions at all or anything like that. So I'll go ahead and do the giveaway. So the first winner is Monroe_Justin for the book. Screenshot that. And then let's see. The next one is Jessica Nicole Bartlett. Awesome. And I'm just gonna follow you guys back. So, and then we have 2 more. Let's see, Brett Photo. And then let's do just like super random. Let me just go to the last person that followed. M. Bean. Was that 4? I think that was 4.
Yeah.
3. Perfect. Oh my gosh. Well, I just so appreciate you guys having me on for this. And it was so much fun. It was very different via Zoom. I wish I could be with y'all in person to do some stuff in the Salt Flats. Hopefully we get to do that in the future. But I really appreciate you guys listening. And I guess you have Peter Hurley next. He's amazing. So yeah, thank you for your time. Yeah.
Thanks, Dixie. You were awesome. I really appreciate everything you did today. So.
Absolutely. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
So for the members, Chris is going to be making an announcement on Facebook about the theme for the Nikon shootout. So look to Facebook for that.
Nope, 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 that's not it.
Got it.
Sorry.
Go, Chris, go.
I have other announcements. I have some service announcements and I have some MPS announcements that I was going to talk about now, but in the theme of getting on to the next presentation, we can discuss the shootout now and then just look at Facebook for what's happening with the rest of things that we're doing. So I'm very excited to present the Nikon shootout. The board will tell you that I jumped through every hoop I've ever jumped through in my life to get you guys product for this. As you can imagine, we're watching every budget. So the theme is, I've moved all my screens around and now I don't know where it is.
Here we go. I'll put it up for you.
All right, good. So the theme is self-portrait, but what I'd like you to do is define yourself in your space, the space you've been for what my boss says is like 85 days now. I'm not going to judge because I know so many of you. I'm going to have my colleague, Jason Stewart, help me with judging. If it comes down to a final decision, then I can cut in. And if we have to, I can go to a couple of other sources to help us. I believe that it's due by, did you guys say noon tomorrow?
Yes.
So it's an overnight overnight assignment, similar to what we've done with all of our shootouts. Do you have the camera prize?
And the prize is?
Dun, dun, dun. Dixie will be so excited for this. It's a Z50 Creators Kit. It is our Z50 camera with the microphone, the Joby tripod, Goby, I guess it's Goby, and the little bag along with the dead kitten. There's an extra battery. It's a really great kit. It's unbelievably, it has that small rig unit so that you can turn the screen back down on yourself so you can do some blogging and some self-portrait work and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we were really excited that they were able to get us one of these. So good luck. Yep. So 12:15 tomorrow Central Time. And I think that it'll go to the photo shelter count like we always do. And Glenn, we're not doing that. Here comes Glenn.
It's on your UPAA member dashboard.
Oh.
If you look, you can enter just like you would enter the APC or the MIC.
Oh, that's right.
1600 by 1600 pixels is the size JPEG, and all the rules are also listed on the website.
Cool. So I'll be around for a couple more presentations. You guys know how to find me if you have any questions. I look forward to seeing your self-portraits. And Dixie, thank you so much. You, my friend, have been phenomenal.
Oh, thank you guys so much. It was so much fun. I hope to meet all of you in person at some point.
Oh, me too. She's great in person.
We're also grateful, Dixie, for the books that she signed and is giving away. We're really grateful for that. We have a couple more giveaways real quick. First of all, we have a Nikon hat and camera strap. And the winner of that is going to be Kristen Grace. So we'll send that off to you. And the next prize, a nice Nikon Fashion City bag going to Nancy Evelyn. And there's what it looks like. So we're grateful for Nikon for all these prizes. Very awesome job. We're going to go ahead and we're going to just leave the session up. And Peter's going to join us. So take a 10-minute break and just come on back and we'll have Peter Hurley.